Hey GFAtv, I'm Jaclyn Jones, back to talk to you about the art and music of Australian guitarist Phillip Houghton. Whether it's visual or musical, artists draw inspiration from all aspects of life and are often influenced by other art forms. Phillip Houghton was a guitarist that expressed himself not only through his playing, but through his art and compositions as well. He wrote many solo and chamber works for guitar and even experimented with electronic music. Houghton's publishing company writes, "His compositions reflect the influence of many styles, classical, jazz, rock, ambient, and world music. His early influences include the music of Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Miles Davis, Satie, Debussy, while his work continues to reflect a strong interest in art, mythology, and the environment." I spoke with Cara Karavitas from Moonstone Music about his work, and she said that, quote, "Many of Phil's piece titles were drawn from ancient cultures, such as Stele, Initiation, Bronze Apollo, From the Dreaming, which refers to the dream time of the indigenous Australians, even Hope." To get a sense of his style, here's a short clip of me playing From the Dreaming with flute player Zishuan Yan. Let's explore two of his paintings and one of his solo pieces. While Phil and Cara spent a month in Greece, they stayed a few days in Delphi, which was the home of the oracle. Quote, "When we first set foot on the ancient site, Phil said that the atmosphere and feeling he was trying to convey in the painting was exactly the same feeling he was experiencing in Delphi, even though the painting was painted decades before his visit." Here's my interpretation. This image represents Houghton's fleeting but powerful feeling, which feels as if in motion. The use of colors and light give it an electrifying feeling against the dark blues. The use of curved lines with jagged edges puts the viewer in an ethereal atmosphere, and the shapes are reminiscent of ancient vines in a futuristic space. I can picture a moving melodic passage that flows but perhaps has some dissonant characteristics. Notice the direction of the line, drawing your eye throughout the canvas, creating direction through color choices as well. This painting pairs well with his solo work, Kinkachu, I Love You. Evangelos Karavitas premiered this in 1998, and it was later recorded by John Williams and Carlos Spinell. Houghton writes, "The Kinkachu, a mythical bird once wounded in the spirit realm, heals and flies into the world." We can all appreciate that sentiment after a year in the pandemic. From the minute you view one of his scores, you can tell you have something special. Houghton handwrote all of his scores, includes very clear right hand and left hand fingerings, as well as creative expressive indications. Houghton asked the player to feel the tempo with a sense of weightlessness to hover and glow. In the beginning, the left hand's gliding first finger represents the bird, starting softly but building as the song progresses, and the bird heals. The campanella technique creates a dreamlike atmosphere with its vibrato and portamenti. Color contrasts and dynamic swells turn the simple melody into a journey. Another interesting fact is that the sixth string is tuned to F. Let's hear what it sounds like. The player must pay attention to timing their articulation in order to gain the desired effect. The mid-stroke Houghton requests can be created through extreme flexion of the tip joint. The tempo and time signature suggest feeling the pulse in one, but as rubato is applied, be sure to move around and base it off the egogic weight or the big beat. Counting out loud with the metronome can help you achieve control of rubato around the beat. In the second phrase, the left hand stabilizes and begins a new pattern. These stabilizing phrases occur in between the gliding ones and each grow as they exchange. In the climax of the piece, Houghton says, "Go for the passion." The next section, or the exhale, should flow like a river. I love how Houghton writes expressive indications like gently slowing silk. You can mimic this motion with the right hand as if you are pulling silk yourself, and to get that gorgeous sound, a tasto is an appropriate choice. At the end, the bird floats away healed. Houghton's music beautifully demonstrates his philosophies and views on the world. He leaves us with a positive message at the top of the score. To Lyndall, to all my friends, life, love, and the whole mysterious, beautiful thing, with an infinity symbol and a bird. The following painting continues on that surrealistic theme. Kara writes, quote, "The triangular monolith can probably be drawn directly from Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. It made a huge impact on his young mind as it did on mine." Here's my interpretation. The impact of a musical note upon the world of man is so powerful it can turn lives upside down. Houghton creates a piercing image using lighting, line, and scale. It's composed of using simple subjects, a triangle, a silhouette, squares representing houses. But throughout the small scale, he creates the illusion of a powerful and otherworldly object, harsh lines against a curving storm. The fading around the triangle gives the shape a foreign aura. The lighting draws you to the light source, the figures being flung from their homes, and the loner watching from the top. Based on the quote, this represents Houghton's strong reaction to the film and how it can disrupt and change our perspectives. I hope you enjoyed learning about Phillip Houghton's music and art today, and I encourage you all to explore his wide range of guitar music. Take care.
Hola a todos, hoy quiero continuar con nuestra serie de vídeos. Este es el cuarto. En los anteriores estoy hablando sobre la historia de la música española, las características, e incluso hablé sobre algunos palos flamencos o bailes españoles aplicados a composiciones para guitarra clásica de Regino Sainz de la Maza. Y en este vídeo quiero hablar de algo que puede estar relacionado, pero que se escapa un poco del contexto de los vídeos anteriores, y es de la técnica de mano derecha, en especial el apoyado y el tirado. El apoyado quizás sea el que pueda ir más unido a la interpretación de música española, ya que bien sea para crear acentos, esa fuerza o escalas aflamencadas, necesitemos de la técnica del apoyado. Lo primero que tenemos que ver es la posición de la mano derecha y la dirección en la que los dedos van a tocar la guitarra. En esta técnica tenemos que prestar atención a que cada dedo, después de que toca la cuerda, va a reposar en la siguiente. Como veis, el dedo índice toca y reposa sobre la segunda cuerda, y el dedo medio a la misma vez está acercándose de nuevo a la primera cuerda, por lo que es un movimiento cíclico y sin interrupción. Si comparamos esta técnica del apoyado con el tirado, tenemos que ver que en el tirado la mano hace un movimiento diferente, y es que el dedo, después de tocar la cuerda, tiene la tendencia a ir en dirección como si fuese a la palma de la mano. A veces tenemos el concepto de que tiene que ser hacia arriba, tirado, pero yo recomiendo evitar este concepto, ya que el sonido, el control y la calidad del movimiento creo que va a ser bastante mejor si lo enfocamos a imaginarnos que estamos cerrando la mano derecha. Es verdad que si queremos tocar más rápido no vamos a llegar nunca a tocar la palma de la mano con los dedos, pero solamente es la idea y el concepto. Cuanto más rápido queramos tocar, es verdad que quizás necesitaremos que el movimiento de los dedos sea más pequeño porque tenemos que ahorrar tiempo, ¿no? También, aunque haya mencionado anteriormente que el apoyado lo utilizaría más para tocar escalas aflamencadas o que estén relacionadas con la interpretación de la música española, no siempre es así, ya que también se utiliza el tirado para tocar escalas. Y quiero poner el siguiente ejemplo para que veáis que una escala no tiene que ser siempre interpretada de la misma manera. Siempre pensamos que tienen que ser rápidas, fuertes y con un carácter, digamos, que proyecte. Pero también tenemos que tener en cuenta que la escala puede estar dentro de un contexto musical y de un estilo que nos llame a interpretarla de otra forma. Por eso quiero poner este ejemplo en el que haría una escala con la técnica de la mano derecha del tirado. Y ahora quiero decir algo importante, y es que una vez que controlemos la técnica del apoyado y del tirado, podemos ver cómo las utilizamos aplicándolas a diferentes obras. Y hay una cosa que quiero decir, y es que las dos técnicas pueden ir combinadas también. Y quiero poner el ejemplo de la obra La gran obertura de Mauro Giuliani, donde quizás se puede combinar el apoyado y el tirado cuando queremos resaltar una línea melódica del acompañamiento. Bueno, este ha sido el vídeo de hoy. Espero que os haya gustado y os haya parecido interesante y que quizás podáis aplicar alguna de las cosas que he nombrado.
It is foolish to even try to attempt to describe romantic music as a single style. From the piano music of Chopin, Liszt, Schumann, the symphonic works of Berlioz, Mahler, Bruckner, late Beethoven, the operas of Verdi, Puccini, Wagner, and the specific traits of nationalism, impressionism, exoticism, serialism, the list goes on. Sure enough though, in our little pocket of this cosmos, I like to think of the guitar in the Romantic period as the little engine that could. The guitar forged ahead, and rather than trying to gain a certain sense of acclaim by trying to copy what other instruments were doing, in the latter part of the period, the guitar began to distinguish itself as its own instrument. Great performers like Llobet and Tarragona and Barrios catapulted the guitar as a vehicle to execute serious music. I think out of all of the periods of music, guitarists feel most at home with this repertoire. It is idiomatic, and most importantly, we can sing along with the memorable melodies. I think it's safe to say that the path from the classical period to the Romantic period is one of lyricism. When I think back to all of the wonderful teachers and mentors I've had, whenever I've played Romantic music, I always heard, "How would you sing it?" I've always admired this simple approach of singing, and of course, an approach like this, there are certain rules and parameters which we want to adhere to. And these rules are different to earlier periods of music. Just because we can, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have the artistic license to do whatever we want. Overall, the music of the Romantic period becomes a bit of a tug of war, the push and pull of the tempo, rubato, the ebb and flow of dynamics, the ever-shifting and sliding harmony. While these ideas are very different to the music than the music that we have explored so far in this series, they are juxtaposed over perhaps the most structured melodic line so far. So in terms of coloration, surprisingly, we are actually somewhat limited by the construction of the music itself. To show these ideas, let's take a look at the opening phrase of Lagrima. As a starting point, let's sing the melody out loud while we play along with it. We want to make sure that in our own playing, we imitate this singing style. You could say that melody-wise, it has similarities to the classical period, in that the volume layering of the melody will set with the idea of the melody being, say, volume 3, the bass being volume 2, and the inner voices being volume 1. But there are differences. The idea of these hairpin dynamics, the idea of rubato. At the end of each phrase, we have the liberty to take a breath. The dynamics of this opening phrase essentially follows the contour of the melody. So if we were to play through it with the dynamics, you can see that we start soft, then we increase, then we relax a little bit. When we consider rubato, we have this kind of idea that it just follows the contour as well. So it starts a bit slower, then builds a bit of momentum, and then relaxes. With a bit of a breath at the end before the next phrase. So in this way, the momentum is being propelled by the contour as well. When it comes to the coloration of these phrases, unlike in previous periods where the musical line timbrally could be kind of changed within a phrase, we generally want to try to complete the phrase before starting a new idea. For instance, the first phrase could be done dolce using rest stroke. And then the second phrase, we could maybe do even ponticello with a free stroke where the difference in attack enhances the color change. The reality is, in this particular piece, going through each phrase using this process, Lagrima can be played very effectively. In no way am I suggesting that this is the only approach to a romantic style piece. I think that one of the defining aspects of romantic music, which doesn't really exist to this extent in other periods of music, is that we can all have a different perception of how we experience and see things. How one person experiences love is very different than another. How we view a piece based on a painting like La Maja de Goya, that's also going to be different as well. I think that the best way to hear these differences is to go back and look at all of the wonderful and diverse performances of Lagrima from last year's GFA convention. Every time I think of this, I am reminded of one of my heroes, Ben Verdery's innovative, creative, and haunting rendition of this piece. The use of the slide, it just cuts to my core.
Hi everyone, my name is Erol Ozsever and I teach classical guitar and popular music at the University of South Florida. And today we're going to talk about how to get the most out of our practice through metacognition and deliberate practice. So how do we really get the most out of our practice sessions? Research indicates that just because we spend X number of hours practicing, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that we're going to improve at the rate that we really want to. And this makes the need for creating structured, deliberate practice all that much more necessary in order to make sure that we keep meeting our goals. So this brings us to the next point of metacognition. Metacognition is our own awareness and understanding of our learning mechanisms and processes. If we understand the basic psychology of human learning, we can think about how we can structure our own practice activities to be able to make sure that we're setting goals and being able to accomplish these each and every practice session. And while it's important to really have long-term goals, like learning a piece for an audition or for a senior recital or something of that nature, we have to make sure that we're accomplishing small goals every single time that we practice in order to be able to get to that point where we can meet our larger, more long-term goals. So when we engage in metacognition and we think about the way we naturally learn and start to plan a practice routine, we're engaging in what we call deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is different than just picking up the guitar and playing for fun, and it's different from performing. They're very different skill sets. So deliberate practice is when we sit down with a clear, directed goal that we want to accomplish for each practice session, and we take the steps necessary to be able to accomplish these goals. A study recently indicated that about 95% of faculty members report giving instructions to their students on how to actually formulate a practice routine, but when the students were surveyed, only about 45% of them claim that they actually do exercise a specific practice routine. This leaves about 55% of students that may not be realizing their full potential and may be falling short of achieving their long-term goals because of a lack of specific goal-directed practice for their short-term daily activities. So this is why metacognition and deliberate practice are crucial in order for us to be able to realize our long-term potential as artists. So a few points on metacognition. Let's start by planning a practice routine. Let's think about exactly what we're trying to accomplish. Particularly if we're learning a new piece of music, a goal that I often give to my students is start with something simple and something attainable, and that each time you practice, you really work out a minimum of 4 measures of music. Now, if it's a particularly difficult piece, you might even narrow that to something smaller. If it's a piece that's just kind of broadening your repertoire and doesn't necessarily feel like it's stretching your skill level a whole lot, maybe you can do a little bit more. There's no one-size-fits-all model for this, but if you're learning a new piece that is stretching your skill level, think about what you want to accomplish each measure or each practice session. So in this particular case, if you sit down with 4 bars of music, you sight read through it, you think carefully about the fingerings, you start to work out the physical mechanism of it, you try to make sure that you're staying physically relaxed and mentally clear, all of these things, and you practice it slowly enough that you can continuously reinforce the correct procedure with all of your motor movements and everything. So that way, by the end of a single practice session, you have more or less worked out and essentially memorized 4 measures of music. Now, you may not be able to get it fully up to speed if it's a particularly difficult work, and that's okay. But naturally, what helps us improve most is the consistency of reinforcing correct procedure. So how do we do that? This might be a little bit of an oversimplification, but avoid making mistakes. And how do we avoid making mistakes? Well, two ways we can do that. Either slow down your practice significantly so you can really think clearly and deliberately about how you're going to actively interpret and perform the movements and the musical gestures. The other thing, too, is just break your music into small enough, attainable pieces. So once you have accomplished this, you continuously reinforce the correct procedure. So essentially, you've got a goal of 4 measures that you've accomplished within every practice session. And if you do the math, and if you think about, even if it's a particularly long piece of music, if you repeat the same process and you accomplish your 4-measure goal each time you sit down at the instrument, and leave a little bit of time to reinforce procedures from your previous practice session as well, you'll have the piece down. You will meet that goal. Now, the next point is keep a practice journal. Because in order for you to be engaging in metacognition, you have to think about the learning process itself, and you kind of have to be tracking and monitoring the learning process. And there are so many ways you can keep a practice journal. You can take detailed notes in your score. You can write things down in an actual separate practice log. You can also record yourself performing. Most phones have great cameras nowadays, so you can record yourself relatively easily. You can even use a social media account to post the little snippets of what you've accomplished during your practice session. This is a great way to not only give yourself a digital footprint and create a social media presence for yourself, but it's also a great way of just tracking your overall progress. And that way, when you see your incremental improvement from day to day, it's that much easier to make sure that you're accomplishing your long-term goals and that you're not misusing your precious time that you've got in a practice room. We're all really busy, so it's very, very important to make sure that we're making the most out of every minute that we have in the practice room. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and happy practicing.